life of me think the name of the city where it's located in Mexico was another very fine restaurant, perhaps even better than Arturo's. Just a little digression. All right, fine. But Pope Pius XI was listened in private to the tragic accounts of the bishops of Durango, Leon, and Tamaulipas, and he sat down to write the encyclical Iniquis Afflictisque, and clearly overcome by what he had learned of the deaths of the firing squad, he wrote, with rosary in hand and the cry, Viva Cristo Rey on their lips, these young students are going voluntarily to their deaths. What a spectacle of holiness for the whole world. Pope Pius XI's heart was with the Cristeros. But feeling was Mrs. Martinez pointed out, the feeling was considerably more restrained at the office of the Vatican Secretary of State. After a lengthy exposition of events in Mexico, Monsignor Gonzalez Valencia of Durango, one of the few Mexican bishops who stood up publicly for the Cristeros, was astounded to hear Cardinal Gaspari express skepticism about the seriousness of the rebel movement. The Mexicans could only retort, Eminence, some people are refusing to give us aid because they doubt the seriousness of our cause, and others say our movement is not serious because we get no aid. This is a vicious cycle, and it must be broken. But he pleaded in vain to the diplomat Gaspari. I've been to Rome 6 times. 5 times by myself, once with my family, shortly after Ratzinger's supposed election. There's the Borgo Pio right near the Piazza San Pietro. There is the Borgo Pio, little pastorias there. Wonderful little places to eat. You see all the Vatican diplomats walking through there. In fact, I was told by, and I won't mention his name, he's a rather prominent blogger. He worked in the Ecclesia Dei Commission from Minnesota originally. I think it's where he is now. I first met him in 1993 on my 3rd visit to Rome, 84, 87, and 93. And he said, if you want to see Ratzinger, which I really didn't, but he was then, of course, the conciliar prefect of the supposed Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's, if you could call that the Congregation for the Deconstruction of the Faith, that's probably a better phrase. But yeah, sure enough, 111, there he came. Black cassock and all, walking across, with his little hat, walking across St. Peter's Square, going back to his apartment. Sometimes he would be in the Borgo Pio, sometimes. Other Vatican officials were there. In fact, one official one time, when I was there in 2005 with Sharon and Lucy, of course, by that point I had gained a great deal of weight. I was essentially unrecognizable from what I was in the 90s. And so we were sitting in one place in the Borgo Pio, and I said, some official from Ecclesia Dei was there, and by that time I was resist and recognize in this resist and recognize movement, or I took the resist but recognize position, as illogical as that was, but we're works in progress, weak vessels of clay, God Christ strikes with crooked lines, and I'm still a crooked line. I hope I'll be made straight eventually before I die. I hope and pray. Now here came some official. I really didn't want to sit. Well, I didn't want to come. Make me invisible, dear Blessed Mother. That was me. He didn't say made me invisible. I mean, he said, you won't walk right past me. That's the one good thing about the weight gain. It took me a long time to lose that weight, almost all of 2010. But it was that a lot of people wouldn't recognize me. And that was an advantage to that. But nice living there in Rome. It's easy. It's easy. to ignore the sufferings of the sheep, when you've got the fine accoutrements of office, and to convince yourself the suffering of the sheep is not as serious as it actually is. That's on their souls. Mrs. Martinez went on to say, the French charge d'affaires of Mexico City wrote confidentially to Foreign Minister Briand at the Croix d'Orsay, Gasperi is, this is a quote, according to Maribel Martinez, Gasperi is exhausted by a stream of Mexican prelates with their strident orthodoxy and their fulminating anathemas. He continuously urges them to come to some agreement with President Calles. Indeed, pitting Italian subtlety against Spanish intransigence, Cardinal Gasperi worked assiduously to dampen the Cristero fire. He advised members of the Mexican hierarchy to refuse encouragement to the fighters. He alerted the bishops of the United States to refuse all appeals for economic aid. The student leader, Rene Capistran Garza, has left a pathetic account of his attempt to raise funds among Catholics of the United States, and I've quoted from that before. Who told the American bishop, there's a reason I quoted that in an earlier presentation, who encouraged the American bishops to give no aid? Cardinal Pietro Gasperi. It is said when Pope Pius XI understood that the agreements that had been entered into in 1929 at the urging of Gasperi, the agreements with Calles, that he wept. He who had issued Ubi Arcano de Concilio, which we'll go over in an upcoming presentation, about the restoration of the social reign of Christ the King and Quas Primus, he who was about to issue his great encyclical letter on the Christian education of youth, Divinae Ilias Magistri, and then a year after that, 1930, was to issue his encyclical letter on marriage in opposition to contraception and all other forms of the corruption and degradation of marriage, Casti Connubii, December 31st, 1930. He was who was to go on to denounce Nazism in Mitbrandender Surge, March 17th, 1939, and communism in Divinae Redemptoris, March 19th, 1937. I said 39, I misspoke, March 17th, 1937, because he was dead by March of 1939. And Divinae Redemptoris, on atheistic communism, on March 19th, the Feast of St. Joseph, 1937, this wonderful, wonderful Pope, who wrote extensively about Christ the King, had himself been a diplomat. But his heart wept. He wept when he learned that he had been betrayed, that Calles had no intention of keeping his word. Murderers never keep their word. Why should we expect murderers to keep their word? Why? Why should we expect murderers of souls to keep their words, ladies and gentlemen? There's no compromise with doctrinal truth, no nuancing of doctrinal truth in order to accommodate men who have expelled themselves from the church by means of their apostasies, their sacrileges, their blasphemies. There's no compromise. And confronted with the facts of how Calles broke his worthless word, and his own successor was continuing those policies, Pope Pius XI issued a mea culpa and a Acerba Animi on September 29th, 1932, the feast of the dedication of the Church of St. Michael the Archangel, explaining once again his support for the suffering Catholics of Mexico and his regret that the persecution had continued after the truce. I just want to read you two brief passages from this encyclical letter that he sent to the suffering, to the bishops of Mexico, but for the whole world. This is from Acerba Animi, September 29, 1932. In the face of the firm and generous resistance of the oppressed, the government now began to give indications in various ways, he's giving the history here, that it would not be averse to coming to an agreement, if only to put an end to the condition of affairs which it could not turn to its own advantage. Whereupon, though, taught by painful experiences to put scant trust in such promises, we, meaning the papacy, Pope Pius XI, felt obliged